August 7, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, dawn. The first wave of U.S. Marines climbed down cargo nets into landing craft. The ocean was calm, too calm. The men were silent. Some checked their rifles. Some prayed. Most just stared at the dark shape of the island ahead. None of them had heard of Guadalcanal 6 months ago. Now it was about to become their hell. The Japanese were building an airfield there. Intelligence said it was almost complete. If that airfield became operational, Japanese bombers could reach Australia, could cut supply lines across the Pacific, could turn the entire South Pacific into Japanese territory. The airfield had to be taken, and the Marines were going to take it. Private First Class Robert Leckie sat in the landing craft, gripping his rifle. He was from New Jersey, 21 years old. He joined the Marines right after Pearl Harbor. Now here he was, about to storm an enemy beach. He looked at the faces around him. Boys, most were teenagers. A few older sergeants who looked calm, confident. Leckie tried to look the same way, but his hands would not stop shaking. The landing craft hit the beach. The ramp dropped. Go, 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 Marines poured out, running across black sand, rifles ready, expecting machine gun fire, expecting hell, but nothing happened, no shots, no explosions, just silence and jungle, thick, dark jungle that seemed to swallow sound. They moved inland, through palm trees, through undergrowth so thick you could barely see 5 feet ahead, still no Japanese, no resistance. By afternoon they reached the airfield. It was abandoned, tools left behind, food still cooking. The Japanese had run into the jungle. The Marines secured the perimeter, dug foxholes, waited for the counterattack they knew was coming. What the Marines did not know was that the terrain around Guadalcanal was about to become as deadly as any enemy. The island was covered in jungle, not the kind of jungle you see in movies, real jungle, thick vegetation that blocked out the sun, mud that never dried, rivers everywhere. And ridges, steep coral ridges covered in trees and vines. Military planners looked at maps of Guadalcanal and marked whole sections as impassable. Nobody could fight in that terrain. Nobody could even march through it. The Japanese thought the same thing, and they planned to use it. Lieutenant Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki arrived on Guadalcanal on August 18 with 900 elite troops, veterans from China, hardened fighters. Ichiki was supremely confident. He believed Japanese soldiers were superior to Americans. He believed in Bushido, in fighting spirit, in the power of the night attack, and he believed the jungle would protect his approach. His plan was simple: march through the jungle east of the American perimeter, circle around behind them, attack at night from an unexpected direction. The Americans would panic, break, run. His men would overrun Henderson Field by dawn. It would be glorious. A perfect victory to restore Japanese honor after the humiliating American landing. On the night of August 21, Ichiki attacked across Alligator Creek. His men came screaming out of the darkness, bayonets fixed, officers waving swords. They expected to find a few surprised sentries, a thin defensive line that would collapse under the assault. Instead, they ran straight into prepared Marine positions, machine guns, artillery, mortars, and Marines who had been waiting for them. The first wave died, cut down before they crossed the creek. The second wave came. Same result. Ichiki kept attacking, wave after wave. The Marines kept firing. By dawn, over 800 Japanese soldiers were dead. Ichiki himself died in the attack. His force was annihilated. The Marines were shocked, not by the ferocity. They expected that. They were shocked by the tactics. The Japanese had charged straight into machine guns. No cover, No flanking, just frontal assault against fortified positions. It was suicide, but that was just the beginning. The Japanese High Command was furious. Elite troops destroyed by American Marines. This could not be tolerated. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi was ordered to take 6,000 men to Guadalcanal and recapture the airfield. But Kawaguchi was not going to repeat Ichiki's mistakes. He was going to use the terrain, the impossible terrain. Kawaguchi studied the maps carefully. The Marines had fortified the northern coast. Artillery covered the beaches. Tanks guarded the approaches. But south of Henderson Field was jungle, dense, thick jungle that military maps marked as impassable. And beyond that jungle was a ridge, a coral ridge running parallel to the airfield. The Americans had not fortified it, because they believed nobody could reach it through that jungle. Kawaguchi would prove them wrong. On September 7, his forces landed east of the marine perimeter. He split them into 3 groups. One would attack from the east, one from the west. But the main force, 3,000 men under his personal command, would march south, deep into the jungle. Through terrain the Americans thought was impassable. They would emerge on that ridge, and from there attack straight into Henderson Field. The march was hell, pure hell. The jungle was so thick men had to cut their way through with machetes. The heat was over 100 degrees. Humidity so high you felt like you were drowning. There were no trails, no paths, just vegetation and mud and rivers to cross. The men carried everything: ammunition, mortars, machine guns, food, water. They moved less than a mile per hour. Men collapsed from heat exhaustion. Some died. Equipment got lost. Units got separated, but Kawaguchi pushed them forward. They had to reach the ridge. Japanese honor demanded it. What Kawaguchi did not know was that Marine Colonel Merritt, Edson, had been thinking about that same ridge. Edson looked at the terrain, looked at the maps, and he realized that if he was going to attack Henderson Field, that ridge was the place to do it from. So on September 11, he moved his battalion onto the ridge. 840 men. They dug in, set up machine guns, positioned mortars, and waited. On the night of September 12, Kawaguchi's exhausted men finally reached the base of the ridge. They had done it, marched through impossible terrain. Now they just had to take the ridge. At 9:30 p.m. they attacked, screaming, firing, coming up the slopes in waves. The Marines met them with machine guns, rifles, mortars. Artillery from Henderson Field joined in. The ridge exploded in fire. The Japanese kept coming, wave after wave. The fighting was brutal, hand to hand in some places, men stabbing each other with bayonets in the darkness. The Marines were pushed back. The Japanese took the southern end of the ridge. They were now less than 1,000 yards from Henderson Field. One more push, and they would reach the airfield. Edson walked the line, rallying his men. "This is it. This is where we hold. They're not getting through." The Marines dug in. Artillery pounded the Japanese positions all night. At dawn, the Japanese attacked again, and again they were thrown back. By afternoon on September 13, Kawaguchi had lost over 600 men. His force was shattered. The survivors retreated back into the jungle. The Marines held. Kawaguchi could not believe it. His plan had been perfect. His men had crossed impossible terrain, reached their objective, attacked with everything they had, and still failed. The Americans should have been surprised, should have been unprepared, but they were waiting, dug in. Ready? How? The answer was simple. The Marines were learning to think like the Japanese, learning to use the terrain, learning to expect attacks from places the maps said were impossible. And they were adapting faster than the Japanese could plan. But the Japanese were not done, not by a long shot. By October, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hayakutake had assembled over 20,000 troops on Guadalcanal, 2 full divisions, heavy artillery, tanks, everything needed to crush the American perimeter. And Hayakutake had a new plan. He would not just attack from one direction, he would attack from everywhere, simultaneously, overwhelm the Americans, give them no time to react. The main attack would come from the south again. But this time, the Japanese would bring heavy artillery through the jungle, 150 howitzers, big guns that could pound Henderson Field into rubble. Then the infantry would attack, not 3,000 men, over 7,000. Multiple regiments, coordinated assault. The Americans would be surrounded, destroyed. Getting heavy artillery through that jungle was insane. The guns weighed tons, there were no roads. The Japanese had to cut paths, build log roads through the mud, drag the guns by hand. Over rivers, through ravines, it took weeks. Men died from exhaustion, from disease, from accidents, but they did it. They got those guns into position south of Henderson Field, hidden in the jungle, ready to fire. On October 23, the bombardment began. Japanese shells rained down on Henderson Field. The Marines dove for cover. Aircraft were damaged. Fuel dumps burned, but the field stayed operational. American artillery fired back, located the Japanese guns and hammered them. The duel continued all night. At midnight, the infantry attacked. From the south, from the west, from the east. Thousands of men hitting the Marine lines simultaneously. The fighting was desperate. In some places, the Japanese broke through. The Marines fell back, regrouped, counterattacked. The line bent but never broke. American artillery fired non-stop. Planes from Henderson Field bombed Japanese positions at dawn. The attacks continued for 3 days. October 24, October 25, each time the Japanese were thrown back, each time they left more dead. By October 26, Hayakutake called it off. Over 2,000 Japanese soldiers killed. The Americans lost 200. The mathematics of the battle were brutal, and the psychological impact was worse. The Japanese had thrown everything at the Marines, everything, and it was not enough. Japanese soldiers who survived wrote about the shock, about marching through jungle they thought Americans could never cross, about attacking positions they thought would be lightly defended, about finding Marines dug in, ready, waiting, with overwhelming firepower. One soldier wrote, "We were told Americans were soft, that they would not fight in the jungle, that they feared the night. Every word was a lie, they fought like demons." The truth was that the Marines adapted to the jungle faster than anyone expected. They learned to patrol in impossible terrain. They learned to set ambushes in places the Japanese thought were safe. They learned to move supplies through mud and rivers. They learned to fight at night. The jungle that was supposed to be Japan's advantage became neutral ground. And on neutral ground, American firepower and logistics won every time. By November 1942, there were 30,000 Japanese troops on Guadalcanal, but they were starving. American control of the seas meant supplies could not get through. The soldiers were on quarter rations, then eighth rations, then nothing. Men ate grass, bark, anything. Disease spread, malaria, dysentery, tropical ulcers that ate through flesh to the bone. The Japanese started calling Guadalcanal Starvation Island. The Americans, meanwhile, were getting stronger. More troops arrived, more supplies, more aircraft. Henderson Field expanded. The Marines who landed in August were exhausted, but fresh units rotated in. The Japanese had no such luxury. Their men just stayed in the jungle, fighting, starving, dying. In December 1942, the Japanese decided to evacuate. They called it a tactical withdrawal, but everyone knew the truth. They had lost. The evacuation happened in February 1943. Destroyers came at night, loaded as many men as they could carry, left the rest behind. About 31,000 Japanese soldiers served on Guadalcanal. Around 19,000 died. Only 12,000 evacuated. Most were so sick they could not fight again for months. The Americans lost about 7,000 killed and wounded. The exchange rate favored the defenders. But what shocked the Japanese most was not the casualties. It was how completely the Marines dominated terrain everyone said was impassable. The jungle was supposed to be Japan's weapon, their advantage. Instead, it became their grave. After the war, captured Japanese officers were interviewed, asked what surprised them about Guadalcanal. Many mentioned American firepower, the artillery, the air support, but almost all mentioned the terrain. They talked about planning attacks through jungle they believed Americans could not cross, about assuming Marines would stay on the coast, about being shocked when Marines appeared in impossible places. One officer said, "We thought Americans needed roads, needed vehicles. We thought the jungle would protect us, but they followed us into the worst terrain on the island, and when they found us, they destroyed us." The answer was training and adaptability. When the Marines landed, most had never seen jungle, but they learned fast. They took advice from Australian scouts who knew the islands. They experimented, tried different tactics, different equipment. Within weeks, Marine patrols were moving through terrain Japanese maps marked as impassable. The Japanese, by contrast, were rigid. They followed doctrine, executed plans that worked in China, but Guadalcanal was different. The terrain was different. The enemy was different. Japanese command was too inflexible to adapt. Officers who suggested changes were ignored. Failed tactics were repeated. Pride prevented learning from mistakes. This showed in every battle. Ichiki attacked the strongest point because it was closest to his objective. Kawaguchi split his forces instead of concentrating them. Hyakutake's artillery revealed Japanese positions without destroying American defenses. Every attack was predictable. Every attack failed for the same reasons. The Marines, meanwhile, learned constantly. After the first night attacks, they improved defenses, added barbed wire, positioned more machine guns. After infiltrations, they tightened perimeters, increased patrols. After artillery strikes, they built revetments, dispersed aircraft. Every Japanese tactic was met with an American counter-tactic. The terrain was brutal for everyone. The mud, the rain, the heat, the disease, but Americans handled it better. Better medical care, better food, better logistics. When a Marine got malaria, he was evacuated and treated. When a Japanese soldier got malaria, he stayed in the jungle and usually died. American supply lines brought mosquito netting, water purification tablets, antimalarial drugs. Japanese supply lines brought almost nothing after the first month. This logistical superiority meant Americans could sustain operations indefinitely. Japanese troops, no matter how brave, could not fight on empty stomachs, could not march when too weak to stand, could not hold positions when dying of disease. The jungle that was supposed to protect them killed them instead. By January 1943, the situation was hopeless for Japan. Americans controlled the airfield, controlled the sea, had fresh troops arriving constantly. The Japanese were trapped, starving, dying. The February evacuation was tactically successful. The destroyers got in and out safely, but strategically, it was disaster. Japan had lost her first major land campaign, Lost an island everyone said was critical. Lost tens of thousands of experienced soldiers. Lost the initiative in the Pacific. The lessons from Guadalcanal shaped the rest of the Pacific War. The Japanese learned they could not defeat American forces through willpower alone. Americans learned they could fight and win in jungle terrain, that Marines could beat Japanese infantry in close combat, that their superiority and logistics mattered more than bravery. These lessons were applied at every subsequent island: Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Every campaign built on what was learned at Guadalcanal. For individual soldiers, Guadalcanal was hell. Robert Leckie survived the entire campaign. After the war, he wrote about the experience, about the jungle, the fear, the exhaustion, about watching friends die, about learning to fight in impossible terrain. His book became a classic account of the Marine experience. Japanese survivors had their own stories. Stories of marching through jungle for days without food, of attacking American positions and watching comrades die, of being abandoned, of starvation and disease. Many never spoke about Guadalcanal after the war. The shame was too great, the memory too painful. The terrain remains. The jungle is still there, the ridges, the rivers, the mud. Tourists visit now, see Henderson Field still operating as an airport, see memorials, rusting equipment in the jungle, but they cannot understand what it was like. Cannot imagine the heat and the fear, cannot comprehend how men fought and died in that green hell. The story is about more than shock at attacks through impassable terrain. It is about assumptions. The Japanese assumed Americans could not fight in jungle. That assumption was based on racism and pride, based on early victories over unprepared colonial troops, based on belief in Japanese superiority. All those assumptions were wrong. And on Guadalcanal, those wrong assumptions killed thousands. Americans made assumptions too. They assumed the Japanese would fight conventionally, would surrender when defeated. Those assumptions were also wrong. But Americans adapted faster, learned that Japanese would fight to the death, would use suicide attacks, and they adjusted tactics accordingly. This adaptability, more than firepower, won the campaign.